I'm going to go over the biopsychosocial model of addiction. It's something I came up with. I didn't invent it, but I kind of came up with this lecture as I was presenting to clients, and then also when I was teaching at Grand Canyon. And so when I went into treatment, my biggest question was, how did I turn out to be this way? Now, I was raised with morals and values, even though my family life was kind of crazy. There was a lot of things going on, divorce, and my grandfather was an alcoholic who was basically my father figure because my dad wasn't around, and I could go on, but there was so much going on in my life as a child that I had a lot of anxiety, and I didn't even know what it was at the time. I did know that I had some physical manifestations. I remember at age 10 or 8, I had what I know now is acid reflux, but I didn't know what it was then, and it bothered me, and I had this anxiety. And so at 13, I took my first sip of alcohol. Actually, I don't even know if you want to call it alcohol. It was Boone's Farm wine. But nonetheless, when I took that first sip and I felt that warm feeling go through my body and all the anxiety subsided. And I remember it vividly, like it was yesterday. And I knew right then that when I felt this anxiety, if I drank alcohol, it went away. And so I set myself on this, and I didn't even recognize this until I went into treatment. I mean, I had no idea. And that's why I think treatment is so important. And at the River Source, we have detox for people who need detox, obviously, which is basically opiates, alcohol, and benzodiazepines. Then we transition them into a 30-day residential program. And when they complete that, then we refer them and transition them into our outpatient facilities. Now, our detox and residential program is in Arizona City. It's out in the middle of nowhere. And it's kind of ironic because when people want to leave and they have no way to get back to wherever they came from, it's very difficult for them because it's all desert and you got to walk like 5 miles to get to the expressway or anywhere where there's people. So I think that was a very strategic move that we put that out there. And we have our outpatient programs. We have one in Gilbert, which is near Guadalupe and Country Club, and it has a partial hospitalization program and an IOP. We have IOP in the morning, and we have an IOP at night. We also have a virtual IOP for people who live further than 35, 40 miles from either of our clinics. Now, we just opened up a brand new, awesome clinic in the West Valley, which is near 75th Avenue and Thomas. And when I say we just opened it up, we just opened it up like last week. We have one client right now who's sitting in the audience. So we pretty much have the Valley covered. If a client, is in residential and they are going to go, which again, that's our philosophy, is to do all levels of care. Because as we know, the number one indicator of success in long-term recovery is length of time in treatment. So if a client does 7 days in detox, 30 days in residential, 4 weeks in PHP, another 2 months in IOP, and then we have OP, which will be starting soon, which is 1 day a week, and then they see the therapist 1 day a week as well. That can go all the way for a year. And again, we know that the number one indicator of success in long-term recovery is length of time in treatment. And I'm not just saying that because I work in a treatment center or that I'm a therapist. It is a study that was done by SAMHSA. And SAMHSA is Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association. It's a governmental body that did this longitudinal study that showed people that have long-term recovery. One of the most common factors is they were in treatment for a long period of time. So that's the River Source in a nutshell. We have great therapists, licensed therapists that are clinicians at all levels of care. We have people that are the leaders, clinical leaders. We have a clinical director in our outpatient that has over 32 years, or 34 years, sorry, he'll make sure I pay for that one. 34 years clean and sober, and has been a therapist for over 26 years. So we have a lot of experience. Even our CEO is a therapist. He's a licensed therapist from Colorado. So it's great working for an organization where the top person is a clinician. To be honest, I've worked in a lot of treatment centers, and it's a struggle between the upper management and clinical, because upper management is concerned with finances, because we got to make money to be in business, and then the clinical side. Also, to let you know, we are a private pay and private insurance facility. So we take all private insurances, most private insurances, but we do not take access. We are not an access-based facility. So that's pretty much the River Source in a nutshell and about me. So as I said, once I got clean, I set on this adventure on how did I become this addict? Because it's not like I was growing up and said, when I grow up, I want to become an addict. I was a business owner. I went to business school at DePaul University. I almost went to law school. That's a whole nother story. But so I was well educated, and I still became an addict. So I wanted to know why, the why of this all. Why did I become this addict? So first, I would like to start with, and again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And Heather, if I give any time in between, because I kind of like to talk, and I love being in front of an audience, by the way, Heather will break in, and I can hear her, and she will ask the question, and I'll say the question, and I'll try to answer it if I have the answer. So first, in the biopsychosocial model is the bio. And that obviously stands for biology. Okay. Biology is probably, well, not probably, it's the highest reason, the greatest reason we are addicts. 40 to 60% of why I'm an addict and why other people are addict is strictly biology, genetics. Science has come up with a genetic marker that is prevalent in all addicts and alcoholics. Now, this doesn't automatically mean somebody's going to turn into an addict or an alcoholic. It just says 40 to 60% of the reason that a person becomes an addict is because of biology. Now, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of addicts and alcoholics, and most, not all, most have people in their family, especially immediate family. And what I mean by immediate family is parents or grandparents that are addicts and alcoholics or are in recovery from being an addict. Most, not all. There's always, exceptions to the rule. And one of the things I was concerned about was, I have this. And the reason I have this is my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, actually died of alcoholism. My maternal grandfather was an alcoholic. And at age 75, he just decided to stop drinking. And he was successful at it. But again, he was an alcoholic. So I had this gene. Now, interestingly enough, my parents and their siblings, no alcoholics or addicts. And then their children, so me and all my cousins, most, not all, my cousins and brothers and sisters are addicts. It skipped an entire generation, this genetics. So again, this does not necessarily mean you are going to become one, but we do have that genetic marker that is passed on from generation to generation. And so, of course, when I heard this, my first reaction is I have three daughters. I have a 20-year-old, I have a 15-year-old, and I have an 8-month-old. 13-year-old, I'm sorry. My middle daughter was 8 months when I got clean. And I give her the credit for making me realize I needed to go into treatment, because I was walking through the living room and she was 8 months old and my oldest was 5 years old. And this was on Halloween. So she was dressed in her little Halloween costume and she raised her hands for me to pick her up. And I walked right by her. And I stopped in my tracks and I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't not be the father that I need to be. I didn't want to be the father that my father was. And me and my dad have a great relationship now, but he just wasn't around. He wasn't an addict or an alcoholic. He just wasn't around. And so, again, this scared me, because am I passing this gene on? Yes. Does it necessarily mean they're going to become addicts? No. What I've been told and what I've seen is that my recovery and what they see me do for my recovery on a daily basis is stronger than this 40 to 60%. And they carry that with them. And so I've been lucky enough, my 20-year-old, she's in a bachelor's program at ASU, and she wants to be a PsyD, a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. So she's following in Dad's footsteps. My 15-year-old, as far as I know, she hasn't had any drugs or alcohol. But as we know, kids are kids. And I believe most, I'm saying, I don't like to use that word all, most teenagers experiment. Okay, and I'll get to that. But again, I was frightened with this 40 to 60%, but my recovery really is stronger than the biology. So here we're kind of hand-tied. There's nothing we can do about it. It is what it is, right? The next part is the psychology. Now, again, I've been doing this a long time, and there's always exceptions to the rule, but most addicts come with some underlying psychological diagnosis. Now, not everybody, but most do. And what I mean by psychological diagnosis is depression, anxiety, bipolar, trauma, which is, linked to anxiety, PTSD, which is also linked to anxiety. And what else on here? Schizophrenia. So there could be a multitude of mental health diagnoses that the addict has, and we call that co-occurring disorders, right? So they have the addiction, but they also have the psychological issues. And again, for me, mine was anxiety. And when I found that self-medication, alcohol, it relieved this anxiety. And at that moment, when I recognized that it relieved my anxiety, I became an addict. Now, I wasn't drinking alcoholically or using as an addict at the time, but slowly over time, it went from once in a while to every weekend, from every weekend to every weekend and Thursday. And then I went to college, and they had the midweek cheaper alcohol on campus. And so it was Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And then, of course, it went to other substances like cocaine and opiates. And the opiates is what really took me down, where I had to use every day. And I had such a high tolerance. It cost me a lot of money. But again, because I was in self-employed and I had some retail stores, I wasn't taking money away from my family. And so it kept me able to purchase the drugs and alcohol that I needed without much consequence to the family budget. Now, of course, my wife wanted to kick me out every week, and I just wouldn't leave because I knew if I left, that was going to be it. And I always thought I wasn't bad because even though I was doing opiates, I wasn't doing heroin, or I wasn't sticking a needle in my arm. Okay. And as we know, that's that thinking that we have that's distorted. My life was out of control, but as long as I wasn't shooting dope, I was okay. So again, we have this biology, and now we have this psychological issue. And now we're putting these two together, and you might be able to see I'm creating a perfect storm here. Okay, the next one, now, before we get to the next one, the psychology isn't, even though it's locked in, because we never truly get rid of PTSD or the schizophrenia or the trauma, we can learn coping skills through treatment. And that's where our outpatient program comes in. Detox is detox. Everybody's in a fog. And even when they're doing 30 days of residential, we're basically doing education on how their addiction affected their life, and maybe even how this affected their addiction. But we're really not getting into the specifics of these because we don't have the time. Insurance may cut them off at 21 days in residential, and we can't open up, Pandora's box of trauma or PTSD to, and then send them out and say, go ahead, and we've opened this box, and now we may have injured them psychologically. So these are addressed in PHP a little bit. So again, we did education in our residential. We're doing therapy on these in PHP. Again, we're not digging as deep, but we do have therapists that are trained in EMDR and CBT and DBT. So we utilize all the evidence-based treatments for all of these. And then we add the next one, which is the social. And this can be just as important as these two. And you might think, well, what are you talking about social? Well, for me, I know, and from my experience of talking to addicts and listening to them, we're sick, both mentally and socially. And so the example I use is an addict doesn't walk into a room full of people and gravitate towards the healthiest, mentally healthiest person in that group of people. We gravitate towards the sickest people in that room. Maybe somebody who's even sicker than we are, so we're not as bad. You know, so we tend to gravitate to people who are like us, and they support our craziness and our unmanageability and everything that goes along with it. You know, so this social aspect, you know, people who are just like us, people who bring us down, people who may exasperate these here, people who get us into trouble, people who, not that they're bad people, because addicts and alcoholics are not bad people. It's just we're sick. And that's one of the concepts that we have here at the River Source, is we are people who are sick. We're not bad people. We're not people who have no morals and values. We're sick people. We're no different than anybody who has another illness like diabetes or cancer. We just have a disease that tells us over and over that we don't have a disease. And when somebody told me that, I was kind of blown away with it, because they're right. You know, every time I had this rationale on why it was okay. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But again, this social aspect, we tend to hang around with people who are just like us. And so these three to get together, again, are a perfect storm. And that's how I ended up the way I ended up, and the way most addicts end up. And for the social part, it's kind of funny, not really, but it's amusing now. I grew up in Chicago, and I would go to the bars, and I left Chicago when I was 27. So from like 19 to 27, I would go to bars, and we were all pretty much drinking every day, the people I hung with, the men, and they were pretty much very aggressive. And I don't want to use the word I want to use because it's not appropriate, but they were kind of tough, tough people, tough guys. And again, so was I, because I grew up in the inner city of Chicago, and I had to, just to survive. So I ended up in Cook County Jail like every weekend. Now, they didn't book you. They just stuck you in a drunk tank. You know, if I got in a fight in the bar, you went in a paddy wagon. They actually had paddy wagons back then. And they would handcuff you and the person you got in a fight with in the paddy wagon across from each other. But they would only handcuff one hand. So you had another hand and 2 feet to beat the crap out of each other on your way to Cook County. But, you know, as drunk people go, by the time we got there, we were best friends, and, oh man, I love you. You know how stupid we act. But so at 27, I said, I gotta get out of here. You know, I gotta leave. This is just not working. So I moved 1,800 miles to Phoenix. And guess what? I met the same people that I was hanging with in Chicago here in the Phoenix area. They just had different names. And we call that a geographical. Thinking I was going to move 1,800 miles and things were going to change. Things didn't change, because I kept doing the behaviors I was doing, and I was attracted to the people just like me. So this is the biopsychosocial model. This we could treat, this we could change. Okay, how do we change this in recovery? Well, it's pretty simple. We start to gravitate to the people who are healthy. And where do we find these people? All different kinds of places. Like I said, 12-step programs, church, smart recovery, celebrate recovery, maybe some other areas in our community. Okay, this is community-based. For me, it was Narcotics Anonymous. I'm a member of Narcotics Anonymous. Now, I don't mind giving up my anonymity at all. But when NA came in to the treatment center that I was at, I related to them because I was an alcoholic and an addict using drugs. And in NA, we just talk about addiction. And so I related. So when I got out, I went to my first meeting, and I was fortunate enough to go to a meeting where there were a bunch of men who had a lot of recovery time. And so they took me in. When I introduced myself as a newcomer, they took me in. And today they are still very important in my life. They are my best friends. One is the godfather of my youngest daughter that I had when I was clean. And these men are my support group. And these men, and now some women, have come into my support group, but I can go and talk to them about anything I'm struggling with, life events that I'm struggling with. And, you know, they come together and they surround me when I'm struggling and they lift me up. Again, this is the social part that we're looking for. And that's why at the River Source, we encourage them to get these people in their life, right? Maybe not in residential because now we have COVID, so it's very difficult for us to bring people into the facility. But once they transition into outpatient, we require them to do some type of recovery and find those people in the community to help them stay clean and sober. And so again, this we can do nothing about. This we could treat, and this we could change. There's a saying in recovery, there's only one thing we have to change: our playmates, our playthings, and our play places. And that's pretty much everything. And so again, the biopsychosocial model. Now, what I'd like to go over, and this isn't erasing very well, but that's all right. Can you still see it pretty good? Okay. All right. So the psychological part, the diagnosis of borderline, bipolar, depression, anxiety, that's something we could treat. And in my title of this webinar is the biopsychosocial model with CBT. So CBT, which many of you may have heard and are aware of, is a modality of treatment. It is evidence-based, and what it focuses on is our thoughts. Our thoughts drive everything, according to CBT. And so again, when I was looking inward to figure out how I became this person, this addict, I really researched CBT. Now I'm going to keep it pretty simple here because we only have so much time. But CBT starts with core beliefs. Now I'm gonna limit this to substance use because I could go through depression, anxiety, and all that other good stuff, but it'll take forever. So I'm gonna stick with substance use here. So what are our core beliefs in addiction? When we're in active addiction, there's some common core beliefs in active addiction. And I'm just going to label some of them. One is, I'm not hurting. Oh, sorry. Can't spell either. I'm not hurting anyone but myself. That is a rationalization that we utilize because if we recognize that we were hurting everybody around us, we wouldn't be able to have this belief. Another one, and I think the most popular one, especially in active addiction, is I can do just one. This one. I got people laughing in the audience because we know, well, I knew that I could never do just one. I never did just one the first time. I drank that whole bottle of Boone's Farm or Strawberry Hill. I don't remember what it was. It was nasty, but I drank the whole bottle. It's not like I had one drink. I drank the whole bottle. Okay. So these are some core beliefs. I'm not hurting anyone but myself. My health is fine. If I get that job, I'll quit. Right? These are all beliefs that we have about our addiction. And we have come up with these beliefs over a long period of time, depending on how long you've been using. But again, these are just some of the beliefs that we have. And you could just see these are just rationalizations and justifications. They're not real. These are not accurate. Okay. So these core beliefs, we learn over a lifetime of addiction. And we learn them either directly or indirectly. Either other people tell us directly these things about our addiction. You're all right, man. You know, my using friends would say, don't worry about it. You know, it's okay. Come on out. No, I got to go to work. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. Or indirectly. You know, I get these messages indirectly about my addiction. Okay. And indirectly means they haven't been said to me vocally, but by other people's behavior. I take that information and of course I twist it around and I make it fit to my, what I want to believe about my addiction. Just like for me, I wasn't eating out of a garbage can. My family wasn't suffering. All those beliefs I had about my addiction. I have a car, I have a boat, I had 2 businesses. All those things were part of my core beliefs about my addiction. Now, once an addict has these and has formulated these, we take these to every situation or event. And so when I go somewhere in active addiction, and even though I may not want to use, because there were many times, and there's nothing worse than not wanting to use and using and having to use or using anyway. I bring that to any situation, and it wasn't hard for anybody to talk me in to using, right? And so again, I have what's called these automatic thoughts. Which we call cognitive distortions. And they're very similar to the core beliefs because those are the things we say to ourselves in act, when we're out using or drinking or not wanting to use and drink. So we have these cognitive distortions, and we have to have these cognitive distortions in active addiction, because if we thought logically, if these were just automatic thoughts that were accurate and logical, then we wouldn't do the behaviors that we do, because the next thing is how we respond or react to our automatic thoughts and our distortions. And those reactions come in either emotional, sorry for my writing, or behavioral, or both. And so we have these beliefs, we take them to every situation we encounter in active addiction. It elicits an automatic thought. Yes, I can use, and that's the reaction. The reaction is not, there's no thought process involved in the reaction. Okay, it's a reaction rather than a response. A response connotates that there's some thought process, but this is a reaction. And I always use on reaction. Most people use on reaction. Okay, and then it comes out either emotional or behavioral. Now, here's the interesting part. This obviously, this downward process does not work. It keeps our lives unmanageable. It keeps us in active addiction. It rationalizes and justifies everything we do. Nobody drinks and then has the thought of drinking, right? We think of drinking and then we do it, right? So the most important part of this equation is this. It's the automatic thoughts. And why I say that's the most important part, and we're getting to be like 15 minutes. The reason I say this is the most important part is because in recovery, it's funny, people come to treatment and they do detox and maybe 15 days of residential, and they say, you know what, I got this. And I say, no, you don't. Your thoughts are still screwed up. My thoughts are still screwed up 15 years later in recovery. That's the part of our brain that has really been affected in active addiction, is our thoughts. And I was taught, because these thoughts sound so great in my head, to go ask 5 different people what they think about this thought. And usually I get that look like, what? Are you crazy? Yeah, I am. Because even today, I have these automatic thoughts that are screwed up. And believe me, I know people that have, 30, 40 years, their thoughts are still screwed up. So this is the most important part. And what CBT says is we got to take these cognitive distortions and these automatic thoughts, and we got to do what's called cognitive restructuring. So the first thing is we got to recognize when I have this screwed up thought. First thing, identify. This thought. And what I tell clients is this is a very deliberate approach and action. So when I have this thought, this screwed up thought, I got to stop what I'm doing. And I got to say, there's something wrong with this thought I'm having. Identify it. The second thing I have to do is I have to look for evidence to support this screwed up thought. Now in recovery, I have enough coping skills, and we teach coping skills for clients to realize that the evidence that we have to look for has to be accurate. Because again, we can rationalize and justify anything. So we have to look for the evidence to support this screwed up thought. When we can't find the evidence, we have no choice but to do number 3, and it's reframe or change this thought. And I'll give you some examples. So again, number 3 is reframe or change the thought. So this has been my thinking 15 years ago in early recovery throughout my entire addiction. And then I was taught this. And so I'm going to give you an example. I'm at a Suns game, and Mr. Beer Guy walks up that aisle probably 15, 20 times a game. And just because I'm clean and sober doesn't mean that I don't have cravings, right? So my thoughts, again, are still screwed up. And my first thought is, I can have a beer. Remember, I talked about that one? That is the battle cry of addiction, just one. It doesn't tell me buy his whole box. It says just one. And then I look for the evidence. What is the evidence I can have one beer? There is none. I've never been able to have one of anything. So I have to reframe that thought and say, no, I can't have beer. And again, this is very deliberate. I got to stop what I'm doing, stop watching the game when I have this thought and say, this is a screwed up thought. There is no evidence for me that I can have one beer. So no, I cannot have one beer. And what happens is human nature says we put ourselves, or we're in the same situations over and over and over again. So by my 4th season of season tickets at the Suns game in early recovery, I've done this 1, 2, 3 with that beer guy, and he has no idea. But I've done this with that beer guy thousands of times. And so guess what happens? This cognitive restructuring changes that core belief. Now that doesn't mean, because again, these are automatic thoughts. That doesn't mean I still don't have the thought. But a couple things happen after I've done this 1,000 times. One is it's not as intense. Craving isn't that intense. And again, what happens over time is these cravings get further and further and further apart. And again, their intensity wears down. So after doing this thousands of times, I still may have the thought, but it's gone. This works. It works for addiction. It works for depression, anxiety. I'll even go in through an anxiety one real quick. So I have an automatic thought. That person who's anxious, who's a perfectionist, walks into a room that has pictures on it. And because they have this core belief that pictures should be straight, they walk in a room and see a picture and it's crooked. Situation, right? That picture should be straight. And the reaction is to do what? go straighten out the picture. Behaviorally, that's what they do. They go straighten out the picture. But what I teach them is when you have this thought that the picture should be straight, we identify it, we look for the evidence. What's the evidence that picture should be straight? Maybe the person who hung it up liked it crooked. We don't know. It's only coming from a place of your core beliefs. So the evidence is it's crooked, period. We don't use those cognitive distortions should, the word should, be straight. It's crooked. And it's okay. I reframed the thought. It's okay that it's crooked. And that's how we teach this CBT, cognitive restructuring, to decrease people's anxiety or depression or any mental health where CBT is indicated as a best practice. But again, for addiction, this is really important because it amazes me when I ask somebody who's leaving, let's say detox or residential, and I say, rate your craving from 0 to 10. They say, I'm not having any cravings. It's a 1. I go, really? I got 15 years and I still have cravings. So what that tells me is they don't understand what a craving is. And for us, for addicts, we react differently to stimuli that have to do with drugs and alcohol. When that beer commercial comes on TV, we physiologically react differently than people who are not addicts and alcoholics. We still may crave it. You know, there's the thing called the phenomenon of craving. That means no matter how much clean time you have, it doesn't matter how great your recovery is, we still crave, even without the use of drugs and alcohol. And people who have 40 years clean and sober still crave it. That's what makes us different than people who are not addicts and alcoholics. It's that phenomenon of craving. And so again, we react differently to stimuli that has to do with drugs and alcohol.